It is the 6th of July 1988. Britain's oil boom is in full swing, and the largest and most productive oil platform is pumping black gold to the shoreline from 3 oil fields.
When I looked at the disaster, it was quickly apparent that what you had in Piper Alpha was a cross between the towering Inferno and the Titanic.
It was a huge explosion. Didn't really know what had happened, you just knew something horrendous.
I didn't know what had exploded at that point, but the fireball was massive, and the heat, even though we were so far away, was intense. He was encouraged to get the boat moving and get away, which he did.
There's 4 of us perched on the bow of this rescue craft. So we ourselves ended up getting rescued.
167 men die that night. Just 37 survive, saved by the incredible courage of the rescue boat crew. A small oversight leads to an immense tragedy and exposes an incredibly superficial approach to the basic rules of safety and reckless platform design. Here in the Firth of Cromarty, in northern Scotland, lie the remains of Britain's oil boom. It is 50 years from the beginning of the North Sea oil boom, when thousands of men volunteered to work on the oil platforms for good pay, but working long hours. Stephen McGinty has written a book on the Piper Alpha disaster.
In the early 1970s, Britain was in deep financial trouble. So the discovery of oil in the North Sea was a massive boom to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It also led to a modern-day gold rush, with American companies specialised in oil extraction in Texas flooding into Aberdeen, which effectively increased the popularity of the town. And you had a number of companies sending men offshore to develop these great fields. And one of those men was Armand Hammer, who was the man behind Occidental.
Occidental Oil was one of the world's largest oil producers and had come in to develop the Piper oil field in the North Sea alongside the Tartan and Claymore fields.
They shared the pipeline. The Tartan, Claymore and Piper shared the pipeline. The pipeline started on the Piper, which was the furthest away from the shore. I think we were about 100 miles away from Flotter, where the terminal was. And then the Claymore pipeline teed into ours and the Tartan into theirs. And that's a sensible and most economic way of doing it, rather than running pipeline under the sea for 3 separate things which were close to each other. And that's the situation with a lot of the platforms in the North Sea, the share pipelines.
The Piper Alpha platform collects the oil and gas from the Tartan and Claymore oil fields, brought to the surface as a mix of oil, gas and seawater that are separated in production separators. The gas is cooled to produce a liquid called condensate that is then remixed with the oil and together conveyed via pumps in Module B into the pipeline to the onshore station at Flotter.
And then the gas pipeline, we sent our gas to MCPO1, we called it, Main Collection Point number 1. And that was gas coming from the Frigg field in the Norwegian sector, going to St Fergus near Peterhead. And that was on what we called on-spec gas, which went straight into the domestic gas main.
Piper Alpha was strategically placed to become a kind of key resource for Occidental. Piper Alpha would become famous prior to the disaster because on one day it produced more oil and gas than any single oil rig in the world before or since. So it was a kind of icon in that respect. It was also positioned in a way that there were two other rigs, the Tartan and the Claymore, and what they did was they passed their gas, effectively in oil, through into Piper Alpha, and then Piper Alpha shipped it back to the beach, which was the kind of mainland as it was called. So it was a massively important oil platform.
So 3 gas and 3 oil pipes rise in the platform, and then a single oil and gas pipeline runs to shore. Module B is divided into an upper and a lower floor. Safety valves that modulate the pressure of the condensate going into the pipes running to shore are located on the upper level, while the pumps themselves on the lower level and the risers further down still.
What was interesting at the time was the accommodation block would be built above where the kind of oil was stored and processed, and that was obviously a key point in the disaster. But that was the kind of the genesis of it.
This is the memorial in Aberdeen to the worst oil platform disaster ever. 167 men lost their lives in the North Sea in an accident that, like all accidents, could have been avoided. Their names are carved into the Scottish granite so that no one will forget. Some of the bodies will never be recovered. Survivors and wives and children of the victims come here to remember. Despite the dangers, helicopters still depart daily from Aberdeen Airport for the oil platforms of the North Sea, where women and men work punishing shifts and return to dry land at the end of an exhausting cycle of work. The sun is slowly setting in the summer sky in Aberdeen, where the families of many of the men aboard Piper Alpha live. Joseph Meenan is a scaffolder working with a contracting company and is on his last day on the platform.
I first started working on Piper Alpha in March of 1988. So when July came round, that was my 5th trip on Piper Alpha. I worked as a scaffolder offshore, so we worked all over the platform, from the very bottom of the platform to the very top of the platform. So yeah, on that trip in July, I was just coming to the end of my 2 weeks. The 6th of July was a Wednesday. We only had one more shift to work on the Thursday, and we'd be travelling home on the Friday morning.
To provide for the rescue of anyone who fell into the sea, an old trawler, the Silver Pit, is anchored close by with a rescue boat ready to launch. Aboard is Charles Haffey, one of the heroes of that tragic night, later awarded the George Medal, Britain's highest award for bravery. He had served in the Royal Navy in the Falklands War of 1982.
I tend to think that the George Medal wasn't just for us. I tend to think it was actually a reflection on the way that I think everybody acted that night. I think you could have, everybody deserved a George Medal that night because everybody performed to the best of their ability and went beyond the call of duty. I suppose through being in the Navy, I've got this resilience in me that tells me no matter how bad I feel, get up, shower, shave, put clean clothes on. Try and lead as normal a life as you possibly can.
Jeff Bollins is an experienced control room operator and has worked on rigs for many years.
I was a production operator. We looked after all the production equipment, and our job was to make sure everything worked well, and the machinery went and we produced the oil and the gas.
The movie Caddyshack was getting on in the cinema that night, so the idea was to head up there, watch the movie for a couple of hours, an hour and a half, and then we just go to bed after that.
I was in the control room. It was my job that night, and a bit of a misnomer calling it a control room. It was built in the 70s, Piper, and the control room was very much monitoring and communications. You'd get alarms in, i.e. a pump's tripped or there's a trouble on a separator, but you didn't know what it was. You just could inform the local operator on the radio, and they'd go down to the module, and there was control panels there where they could actually start and stop things and alter levels and pressures and things like that.
Basically, you know, most of your time was spent just, you know, cleaning the ship, doing basic seamanship tasks, launching what we called the fast rescue craft, doing man overboard exercises or drills with the oil rig, stuff like that, you know. That basically was what we were out there to do, you know.
Also operating close to the platform is the Tharos, a service platform that provides extra safety backup and maintenance. Tharos also has incredible firefighting capacity. It is a beautiful summer evening, and the cold North Sea is calm. The sun is still high in the sky at 6 p.m. when a maintenance team takes away the safety valve of gas condensate pump A. The removal is part of a planned overhaul of the whole of the pump that has been properly authorized and registered. Since the shift ends at 6 p.m, the team cannot finish the job, so they close off the upstream open pipe with a blind flange, a flat disc that is attached to the pipe with 6 bolts. They leave the note not to reactivate the pump in the box next to the pipe.
That night we produced a lot of what we call condensate, which is LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, and we used to liquefy the gas and pump it back into the pipeline. And we had 2 pumps, which we called the condi pumps. That night we only had 1 running because one was with maintenance. And then about 9:45 that night, the pump tripped. Again, you didn't know why it had tripped the control room, just an alarm telling you it had tripped, I passed it on to the gas operator, Bob, and we all radios, you spoke to everybody on the radio, and Bob, the other Bob, who was the supervisor that night, picked the message up and says, "Got that, Jeff?" And we were a good team, you know, and had your own area.
Well, the idea was that there was a shift change in the evening, and that one shift would brief the next shift as to what would happen, so that everyone would be aware of what was going on. And what happened on that night was, it's confusing, but it was either misplaced or put down without a kind of verbal confirmation as to what happened. So the gist of it was the handover, there was a failure in the handover. So one team who worked during the day, the information didn't get to the team who worked at night.
The liquid gas condensate crystals have blocked pump B, but since it is the condensate pumps that power the turbines that in turn make electricity for the whole platform, it is urgent that one of the 2 pumps continue to function.
Bob was down there, then he came back in and said, we can't start, get it restarted there, so we're now having to flare the gas, which isn't what we're there for, but so he said, I'm going to, and the other pump that we didn't have, as far as we knew, there was a permit out for it, for what we call a PPM, Planned Preventative Maintenance. And the maintenance department had it. And Bob says they haven't started work on that pump yet. I'm going to get over to Clarkey, who was the supervisor from the maintenance department. We'll get the permit signed off and we'll put the other one in. Now Bob retrieved the permit out of the box. Clarkey had his copy there. They signed it all off. It was electrical, he isolated, had red tags on it, and the switchgear would have been padlocked off. And Clark, he says, get hold of Jim Savage, the electrician. He said, and I'll tell him the permit signed off, and to reinstate the electrical gear.
The movie just started like maybe 9:10 because they knew people were working till 9 o'clock. So we got up to the movie, and it was about 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes. We were sitting in the cinema, and Caddyshack was a comedy, so it was good fun. Everybody was having a good laugh. It was a good atmosphere in the cinema. And then you could hear some really high-pitched screaming noises from outside, you know, like a jet engine revving up really, really powerfully.
So when they pressed the button and had the pump ready, it would start. Did that. Sammy Clark, Jim, he came back to us, he passed the message on, and off they went. Then a few minutes later, I got just one low gas alarm in by itself up there, which wasn't a major thing, you never got it. And you used to have to go around the back of the panel to find out which exactly it was there. Before I could really move, just within sort of seconds of that, I just got loads of gas alarms in altogether.
They activated a pipe that they should not have activated. And they activated a pipe that was not tightly secured. And the reason it wasn't tightly secured was it was offline. They were working on it. And then what happened was, when they activated it, condensate, which is kind of liquid gas, burst through the flange, and the flange is like a plate, a metal plate. So if you think of the rays on the rays on a sun in a child's drawing, that's effectively what happened. Condensate blew out of this pipe.
The fire and gas panel, for want of a better expression, just lit up with like a Christmas tree with red lights, and it had a big klaxon on it. And I'm trying to silence the klaxon, and you accept the alarm, which clears the panel and stops the klaxon. But of course, the next one is just coming in all the time because that many of them. And I'm talking on the radio, and there's a bulkhead to my right-hand side here that exploded and knocked me about 15 foot up the control room.
It started up again, maybe about 2 minutes later, but even more intense. And then all of a sudden there was a huge explosion. The platform rocked back and forward quite violently. Some people got thrown off their seats. Part of the roof of the cinema fell in. Lighting came down, movie went off. There was an initial panic for people to get up and get out because it was really quite busy that night. The cinema held about 40 or so people. It was maybe between 30 and 35 people in there. But we managed to get everybody calmed down and get out the cinema back into the accommodation area.
What we don't know is what ignited it. But what we do know was that condensate was ignited somehow. And what that then happened was it triggered an explosion. And the tragedy was that the explosion punched through the firewalls. So firewalls are designed to have a fire slowly build up and to hold for 5 or 6 hours. But because there was an explosion, the explosion punched through the firewalls, which shredded them, which turned them into pieces of shrapnel.
The oil platform is on fire, but the RAF Rescue Service has been alerted and the Tharos has trained its hoses at the base of the fire. The crew is following procedures as they have been trained, but nothing has prepared them for what is to come next. The control room is out of action. No communications can come in or go out. Jeff Bollins is lucky to be alive.
Fire and gas panel, the telephone system, the radio system, the tannoy system, the ship-to-shore radio, the flotter, Claymore, tartan communications, they were just all gone. None of them were working. Control room was filled with smoke. It was quite strange really. There was like no smoke to about there and a lot of grey smoke above it. The John Brown electrical turbines had tripped, so I knew there was no power on the platform. Emergency lighting had come on, and I just went and pressed the emergency shutdown button.
First explosion was just before 10 o'clock. I must have got up to the galley maybe 6 or 7 minutes after 10. And there was, when I got up there was maybe about 100 men sitting or lying on the floor or sitting with their backs to the wall and such like in the kind of sitting area of the galley.
I got out the smoke with Clarkey. I was quite fortunate. I got into space. He was leaning over the top of my desk, and he'd gone into a bulkhead there and he'd hurt his shoulder. So we got him outside. We were on the walkway outside, which we call the 90-foot level, in the corner. The flames were coming around the crane pedestal out of B module, as a matter of fact. The gas explosion and all the gas alarms were in C module, which is the gas module.
And I shouted, "Is there any scaffolders here?" And the guys I'd been with earlier on were around a dry store area, which was adjacent to the kitchen area of the galley. So it was actually right round the back. So I had to walk through the galley to get round to see these guys. And when I got round there, they were the same, all sitting on the floor. Around about 20 in this area. They had like towels over their faces, but wet towels. And then they says, "Joe, go up to the sink there, there's towels there, get one and soak it." So I went up and I grabbed a towel and not thinking, but I just turned the tap on as you normally would, but there was no water.
When there was a disaster on a rig or the alarms went off, people went to their muster points, which is where they would actually try and get off the rig. And for many people, the muster point was inside the rig in the canteen. And what happened was you would wait there and then you would be kind of escorted up onto the helideck. Kind of
what we thought after a discussion between us all, we said, well, what do you think, lads? What are we going to do if we stay here? And the smoke was getting more intense, the emergency lighting had gone off, you could hear other small explosions going on in different parts of the platform. So if we stay in here and something else happens, we're not going to be in a position to be able to do anything for ourselves. Why don't we go out and go up onto the helideck and see if there's any possibility? So we left that area through the back door of the galley, climbed up onto the helideck, and that's when we realised how bad the situation was. What should have happened in a perfect world was that they would realise that, and the OIM, the Offshore Installation Manager, would have announced that this was not possible, this escape avenue wasn't possible, and that people would have to make their own way off the rig, which is a horrific thought.
If the fire alarm goes off in the factory, everybody goes out into the car park and you're safe. On an oil rig, oil platform, on a ship, if you've got to abandon and you have to go in the water, that's really the start of your problems. It's not the end of them. You've got a whole new scenario there, a whole new situation that you now have to cope with. It's survival, but it's a different kind of survival.
And so we had a procedure where if the divers were in the water, you used to put the pumps that took water out of the North Sea onto manual, because there'd been an incident a couple of years earlier where a diver, the pump had started automatically and the diver had nearly got entangled with it.
At the time, it was common practice that as the water was drawn from an underwater pipe, if there was a diver in the water at the time, the pumps were turned off. So that was a kind of an issue that would have major or some repercussions during the actual disaster. There was also the idea that the pipes that were coming from the Tartan and the Claymore, they had looked at putting a kind of a stop effectively halfway through the pipe so that they would be able to sort of shut down the oil and gas that was coming from these other platforms, but they decided prior to the disaster that that would be too expensive.
I put on my survival suit, which is an all-in-one suit that we wore in the rescue craft. We went up to the rescue craft and I grabbed the radio because I was what was termed the hookman or the bowman, the radio man. So I just grabbed that. And then we just went in the rescue craft and we were launched and we were in the water. We were in the water pretty sharpish actually, you know. And then what we did was we made a beeline for the rig. Now we just held off the rig because we could see guys unreeling hoses and there was an air of, I would say, calm, well not calm, but an air of you know, workmanlike, you know, they were going about their duties, firefighting duties and stuff like that. So we thought, right, okay, we'll hang off.
Bob Vernon, who was the lead operator, was mentioned, and Robbie Carroll, the safety officer, had explained to them what I've just said to you. They both put breathing equipment on, breathing apparatus, and went into the smoke to try and start the fire pump, which was maybe just about 20 yards from where we were stood. Unfortunately, they were both killed. While I stood there, there's nowhere to go. We couldn't go where the flames were. We couldn't go where we normally would have gone into the accommodation block because of the smoke. You couldn't get to the lifeboats because they were all in the same area as well.
It quickly came apparent that there would be no chance that any helicopters landing on the platform with the amount of smoke, dense, thick black smoke that was coming across the platform. So from there, we came along the heli deck and there was a converted container which was the heli deck landing office and the radio room combined. So we climbed up on top of that, and that was the highest point we could get to in that area.
And in the end, one of the riggers got a rope and he tied it to the handrail and put it over the side, and Ben were going over the side and climbed down the rope. So I managed to get a life jacket myself there, and I struggled to fasten it a bit with my thumb being bad, but I got it knotted on that. And I remember climbing down this rope with Clarkey and Ian Ferguson helping him down, and this knotting my life jacket kept knotting with the knot on the rope. But anyway, I got down onto what we call the spider deck, which was just above the water level.
So let's say there was about 12 or 14 of us there. So we could see the smoke coming across in layers. So when there was a gap coming in the smoke, we stood up to catch some breaths of fresh air and then back down again as low as we could.
And by then the Silver Pit, which was the standby boat, had launched its Zodiac rescue craft. And it had come in a couple of times taking her back, and I think this was the third time it had been in, and I managed to get a space in the boat, and then Neil Cassidy got one after me and it was full and off it went. Maybe he's got 50, 60, 70 yards away, I don't know distance exactly, and it stopped because he was struggling with the gears or something. When we had what I call the second explosion, which was the one at 10:20, which was the big fireball.
But just as we got over to the west side of the platform, that's when the riser from the Tartan platform, the gas riser, fractured. It was a huge explosion. Didn't really know what had happened, you just knew something horrendous, but everybody just jumped back the way, and then for me everybody just seemed to disappear. It just took off in different directions. Myself, I ran across to this radio mast, which was just at the side of the emergency heli deck, and I climbed onto that and started climbing up the way, and I was actually going nowhere. It was like a dead end.
So what you have is a swimming pool of burning oil, heating pipes, And that's where the tragedy took place. Those pipes had 1,200 tons of gas under high pressure, and there was 3 of them. So within minutes of this disaster, you had 3 pipelines that were going to blow.
The Tharos was alongside as extra accommodation vessel, and they had a water cannon at the top of one of their cranes, right at the top of the crane boom, and that was fanning back and forward. So that actually soaked our clothes, soaked our hair and everything, which was a big relief at the time, but I also believe it helped save me get more badly burnt a bit later.
On one level, what's tragic about Piper Alpha was that on paper it should have been perfectly positioned for rescue, because just off the bow of Piper Alpha was the Tharos. The Tharos was a platform specifically designed for firefighting in the North Sea. It was like a coffee table on legs, equipped with powerful water jets, equipped with a ladder, and designed to rescue people. The problem was that the Tharos was too far away from Piper Alpha. The ladder could only go out at 1 metre a minute, and they didn't have the time, so they were putting the ladder out, but it wasn't actually getting there in time.
And I just thought to myself, well, that's it, I'm dead here. But also at that time, something else just came over and took over what I was doing. I don't know what it was, whether it was just a will to survive or some higher being or whatever. But I came down the radio mast, and it took me down to the level below the helitech, run along to the access stairs that took you back up onto the helideck, run across to the north side of the platform, had a look over because the explosion had cleared all the smoke, and I could see the water.
When the gas line went, and well, you just knew that was the end of it, because I didn't know what had exploded at that point, but the fireball was massive, and the heat, even though we were so far away, was intense. He was encouraged to get the boat moving and get away, which he did.
It was a statistic fact that those pipes would blow, and they would lead to one massive explosion after 20 minutes, another massive explosion after 40 minutes, and a third massive explosion after an hour. And it was those massive explosions which destroyed the structural integrity of Piper Alpha and eventually led to it collapsing into the North Sea.
So I had a life jacket on at this point, took the life jacket off, threw it over in front of me, and like I say, I knew exactly what I was doing, but it was as if something else was making me do what I was doing. And then I took a run, and there was supports for the safety netting that went round the helideck. Used that to propel myself off as far as I could.
I realised that there was men coming down on to the spider deck. So again, we went in and we took as many guys, I can't remember how many guys, but we just filled it up. You know, as many guys as we could. We took them back to the Silver Pit.
First thing that came back into my head was, what the f have I done? And then from there wasn't another thought come into my head. It took roughly about 7 seconds to cover that distance of 175 feet, and then bang, I hit the water. I don't really know how far I went down, but I had a reference because I could see the flames from the fire above, so I had a reference to get back to the surface. Got back to the surface, huge big gulp of breath, looked on my right hand side, and lo and behold, there's a life jacket floating in the water beside me. It must have been the one I threw in front of me. So I managed to get my arms through that.
There was one in particular where the lads were all in an upturned hull of a lifeboat. This lifeboat was charred black, you could hardly recognise it. And these guys were all on there, and some of them, the clothes had been burnt off them. And as I say, we were trying to grab them, but you were kind of slit them off with the oil and the flesh. But as I've always said, you know, your priority was to get these guys to safety, to get them in this rescue craft and to get them out of danger. So you just had to do that, you know. And then we did that 2 or 3 times, and then we started noticing towards the end, or maybe see the back of 1, 2 o'clock, there was less and less survivors that were finding in the water.
So as I came off the north side of the platform, the current was taking me away from the platform also. Got so far away, at least one of the lifeboats in the north side of the platform had been blown off in the explosion. That was floating in the water some 20 or so metres away. Managed to swim over to that, climbed into that.
We were approaching the rig, and then suddenly these guys appeared from nowhere. Apparently they were divers, so they'd come up, so we managed to get them on board. I think that was from the rig per se. That was about the last. I think they were the last 3 guys that we kind of got before, you know, we found another 2 guys further out.
And I was looking back at the platform, I was trying to take in what I was seeing, you know, I just couldn't believe it, you know. And then also at that point, because I had a short sleeve shirt on that night, because we'd finished our work, we just were casual clothes on, I had a short sleeve t-shirt, and I noticed these huge blisters on my arms, and I couldn't really figure out how that had happened.
Suddenly this guy did appear waving to us, so we thought, oh well, because Jimmy says, what do you think? We said, Jimmy, let's just go for it. We have to get them in. So we did, and it paid dividends. And I think one of the guys was swimming to us, they've said this, he went under, then he came back up, then went under again, and there's an old sailor's adage that says, if you go under for the 3rd time, you're not coming back up. This guy did go under, and I actually put my hand in, and as I said, more in hope than expectation, and I grabbed, and I managed to grab a hold of this guy, and he came up, so we managed to get him into the rescue craft.
A fast rescue craft was speeding towards this lifeboat, and they came, got me into the lifeboat, got me into the fast rescue craft, asked if there was anybody else in the lifeboat. I said no. They lay me down the side of the fast rescue craft, and that's kind of when my injuries started taking effect on me.
Neil Cassidy, who came in behind me, sat at the back, and he's starting to combust when we had the fireball, and he's hitting Joe over the head and shouting at him in language only known to him.
And there was guys there standing, and I'll never forget this, their hands, the skin had peeled, it was hanging off their fingertips. It was literally like a mirror image, an absolute mirror image, you know, and it was like somebody peeled a rubber glove, you know, and now, you know, as I say, I think your brain refuses to take stuff like that in, and it's a self-defence, a cope mechanism, because at the time, you do remember you went through the motions, you know, but it's not until you come back and you think about these things that you kind of recall how bad these guys were burned.
It was a little boat, but that night it was a big boat when you had 3 injured men in the water. In the end, one of the divers went in the water and got them out, and I was struggling to walk because I'd had my hip when the wall came in, and I'd said to Fergie when the platform fell into the sea, well, I'd said everyone's dead, and Erland, my colleague, I said Erland will be dead, and he said he's downstairs in a bunk. And I went downstairs. He was one of the men they rescued, which I hadn't seen come aboard.
The Piper Alpha platform is ablaze. By a quirk of fortune, we have these pictures taken from the Tharos, where a photographer was aboard. What had gone wrong, and who was to blame?
The risers have obviously broken, and the oil is now coming straight up onto the sea. And in fact, the sea is burning as well.
The series of explosions suggests a sequence of events that could have caused the tragedy, although some of the evidence was destroyed with the platform itself. The way the platform was built meant that there was no way of cross-checking maintenance slips between the work done on the valve and the overall approval to perform work on the pump.
They took this big valve off the condensate there, which was in a different module to where the pump was. The pump was on the 68-foot level, the valve was in the 90-foot level, so it went through the ceiling, the pipe work. And when he got the permit out that morning to remove the valve there, give him that, then the maintenance got a permit with the pump being shut down to do like a service on it. And they didn't cross-reference the pumps. The permit should have been together. When we went on shift and Bob, the supervisor who signed it off, didn't know, he'd only come on that day on a crew change, and he didn't know that safety valve had been missing, and I didn't. The two permits should have been cross-referenced together. Something as simple as not cross-referencing two things, which in effect were for the same piece of equipment.
Although what ignited the liquid gas remains unknown, the explosion ripped through the fireproof walls.
The idea was that there were firewalls between the different compartments, so that if a fire began in one compartment, the firewall would hold for maybe 4 or 5 hours before spreading on to the other compartments. So there was, they had planned for an event to take place. What was not planned for was an event of the magnitude of what took place.
The shutdown valves were on the platform. And so when the gas, the thing that exploded is what we call the riser from tartan, and I think that was about a yard wide, the line, and they pumped gas in at about 1800 psi. And of course when the platform shut down, the emergency shutdown valve shut down on the platform. So we now had shut-in gas, and tartan continued to pump gas, and the flames attacked the pipework. Gas got warmer, metal got hotter, and it went, well, if the shutdown valves are now in the sea, so the gas wouldn't have been on the platform.
There was no way of stopping the Claymore and Tartan fields pumping their gas and oil to Piper Alpha. And as soon as the risers ignited, the massive fireball swept through the platform. The investigation was handed over to Lord Douglas Cullen, whose final inquiry found fault with the overall design and the internal workings of the platform.
All the communications and all the controls, what was there, were in the one area. So the people in the accommodation, which was the muster point, like the OIM and everybody, people making decisions, didn't have a clue what was happening. I think most of the new ones have satellite panels now, so they can at least see what's happening. And the new platforms now are two platforms, one for production and drilling and one for the living accommodation.
The pain caused by the Piper Alpha tragedy continues to this very day. Here at the Memorial Gardens, friends and relatives of the dead and survivors come to pay silent tribute to those who died.
It was a roar. It was like a roar. It was like an acetylene torch. If you could imagine, when you switch on this, you hear it on the television. If you could magnify that about 1,000 and odd times, that's what it was like. It was absolutely like that. And I'll tell you how much that fire affected me. When I came back home, I used to stay with my brother. He had a coal fire. I was terrified of that coal fire for about 3 days before I managed to convince myself. I went to light my fire, because I love my coal fire. And I lit a match, and I couldn't take my eyes off the flame. I was transfixed with this flame. And I said, Charles, you're being unreasonable here, eh? Come on. So I threw the match in the fire, and I put the fire guard up, and I kept the fire guard up because I was terrified.
Now, Gareth Parry Davis was the diver who was in the water at the time of the disaster. So, to his mind, he in some way felt responsible, because in his mind, if he had not been in the water, the pumps would not have been turned off. Perhaps the sprinklers would have came on and other people would have got off. When he himself was on the silver pit, he rescued many people out of the water. He even dived back into the water to go back out and try and rescue people who were drifting past. Gareth Parry-Davies was a tremendous hero, but the trauma and the horror of Piper Alpha never left him. And it was almost 20 years later, in fact it was after 20 years, that still haunted by these things, he took his own life. He drowned himself.
I was due to go back and I couldn't sleep. I was going to fly up the next morning, and my wife said to me, "Well, you've got a partner and you know when they ask you a question, you know they know the answer to." And she said, "What's the matter with you?" And I said, "Oh, the thought of going there tomorrow and getting on that helicopter and going on the Claymore platform." And so she said to me, "Why don't you do 3 things? Go to sleep, get up in the morning and phone them and tell them you're never going back, and then get on with your life." And that's what I did.
After the disaster, there was what's known as the Cullen Inquiry. Lord Cullen was a High Court judge who led a public inquiry into the causes of the disaster and what could be done to stop it from happening again and improve safety. The key safety mechanism from the Cullen Inquiry was that no longer, when rigs were built, would the accommodation block would be built above the oil industry platform. So effectively you would no longer live above the shop. The accommodation block would be a separate section connected to the oil platforms by a gangway, and that would have massively, had that been in operation that night, that would have massively reduced the number of deaths. But that was one of the kind of key points, along with a tightening up of the permission to work system.
Charles Haffey was awarded Britain's highest peacetime bravery medal, the George Medal.
When I was at home, my brother, as I say, I stayed with my brother. He had 1 bedroom, I had another bedroom. And my brother says, "You've got a letter here." I went, "What, for me?" "Yeah." "Who from?" "I don't know. It's got the Palace of St. James." I went, Aye, all right then." So anyway, I gets up and I'm like, "So what's this?" And it was like, what is it? Her Majesty, no, the Prime Minister has gratefully advised the Queen to award you with the George Medal. And I just kind of thought, well, it was difficult to take in. I spoke to my dad, who was a fireman, who kind of knew what this, better than me, what this was all about, like, eh? And it was my dad that said, he said, "Do you know that that's the highest peacetime award for bravery you can get?" You know, so I thought, well, okay.
30 years later, the Deepwater Horizon caught fire in the Gulf of Mexico, killing 11 workers and devastating hundreds of kilometers of Texan shoreline. Once again, cost-cutting cost lives, and the worst ever oil platform disaster seems not to have taught any lessons.
We had 4 modules, A, B, C and D, and then it was like a split between A and B, and you watched B, C and D just slowly slip into the sea, and you just knew that anybody still on board would perish, and it wasn't a pleasant sight at all. It was quite, but yeah.
Sometimes I stay awake at night, and sometimes I think, when I hear somebody saying, you know, it would have been my granddad's or my dad's birthday, sometimes I say, you know, what if we turned to port instead of starboard? What if we did this instead of that? You know, could we have saved that one more life? Could we have saved that child's grandfather or father or uncle? You wrestle like that, you know, and I do, because I think to myself, these kids are going to grow up and they're never going to know the love of their dad or their uncle, whom, to me, they're deserving of that love, because the guys that go out in that rig, they're exceptional guys. They are extraordinary guys doing an extraordinary job, in my opinion. And they're still out there today doing that. You know, and I think that those kids have been denied the most special gift, and that of love, the love of one of these North Sea guys.
Occidental Petroleum brought world-renowned oil rig firefighter Red Adair and his team in to put out the fire. It took them 36 days. Their first sortie aboard the platform confirmed that there was no one alive. Today, the port of Aberdeen is the maritime hub for the North Sea oil industry. Here, the tugs and service and exploration ships have been working for the oil industry for over 50 years. Not far to the north, in the Firth of Cromarty, oil rigs have been parked during the downturn in demand as the oil reserves become exhausted. Thousands of women and men have worked on them over time in a seemingly unending cycle of shifts out to the rigs and back, keeping the wheels of the world turning. 167 of them never returned.